Our first presenter is Jennifer Boyd from Westchester University of Pennsylvania.
Can everybody hear me okay? Good? Okay. My paper is entitled From Geek to Chic, a case study in identity and consumerism. According to Michael Saylor, we are all geeks now. What is geek? Often the word conjures up images of overweight, white, older basement-dwelling men hunched over computers. It's an outdated, stereotypical version of members of this particular subculture of society, and has lost a lot of the aspects that historically coalesced together people who did not fit in or were rejected by the mainstream society. Defining geek as a term is difficult. Many sources either combine the various definitions of geek and nerd together to form one loose term, or choose one narrow, select definition which does not even begin to cover the whole of the culture. For the purposes of this paper, geek will refer to a person who is obsessively fascinated with particular subjects. In the past, geeks were limited to interactions with other geeks through interpersonal relationships within their own community. Day by day, more people are getting online, and technology that used to be science fiction is now part of our daily routines. Advancements in technology connecting people not just in a room, but across great distances, geeks have been experiencing a fully blown renaissance of their interests across mainstream media. The influences of popular and mainstream culture help define our identity. As mainstream pop culture embraces geek-centric values, identity as a geek becomes increasingly prevalent in today's society. Identity defines us, and prevailing ideology often dominates us and governs our behaviors, mannerisms, and elevates what we believe to be important aspects of ourselves. According to the Associated Press, Facebook reached over 1 billion users as of September 2012. Less than 8 years before, the highest number of users Facebook had achieved was just 1 million. One of the byproducts of an ever-increasing global network is the availability of information at our fingertips. On the internet, every participant has every possibility to delve into a field of interest, thereby becoming a geek. Through a virtual globalization of ideas and exchange, geek culture began its journey toward increased popularity. In this paper, I explore how the concept of geek as chic is viewed by geeks across the spectrum. If the growth of geek popularity continues, we may all consider ourselves geeks in the future. In researching for this paper, I conducted fieldwork in the form of a field study of the games Chic in Westchester, Pennsylvania, utilizing participant observation. I also conducted semi-structured interviews with Carl Kemmerer, Jason Lieber, and Tara Fremont. The Games Keep is a popular gaming retail store owned and operated by Carl. Jason Lieber is a young professional in the banking industry that has been playing Magic the Gathering for over 20 years. Tara Fremont is a young professional in the HR industry who has identified as geek since childhood when her father introduced her to Dr. Who. The Games Keep is a moderately sized shop with a varied age range and socioeconomic status of its members. Since opening 8 years ago, Carl has dedicated approximately 70 hours per week attending to his customers' needs. During our interview, Carl expressed he had wanted to become self-employed using his interest to find a viable business. The majority of Games Keep customers are Magic players. Magic belongs to a group of gaming cultures that rely on emergent rules, cooperative associations, and fantasy-themed constructions. On the whole, both Carl and I observed that the general customer base of his shop comes from all walks of life. White-collar workers making six-figure salaries seated next to college students. Ages span from middle school children to adults in their 70s. Outside of a collective interest, most patrons have very little in common. The bond achieved through their shared interest is the social glue to their relationships. Jason Lieber has been playing semi-professional Magic for over 20 years. He identifies himself as a geek through and through, attributing his introduction to his mother encouraging him to game. Although primarily involved with the board, card, and video game communities, Jason expresses it isn't a bad thing to be a geek anymore, so he lets his geek flag fly all over his Facebook page with status updates about deck-building ideas, memes, and the latest gossip on fandoms. I don't feel awkward talking to colleagues about The Walking Dead or Doctor Who, Jason noted. No one bats an eye anymore. Closet Geek has been let out to play. Jason views the geek community as one that is open, accepting, and wanting growth. After all, he says, what good is having a great game without someone to play with? Tara Fremont is a young professional who has identified as geek all her life, hesitating in the past to express her interests. She recalled being bullied in her teen years for playing Magic. One such bully coming by her house was she was on the roof helping to set up Halloween decorations, and after taunting her for being a geek, encouraged her to swan dive off. Now she feels freedom in the recent popularity of Geek, attributing its growth due to the influence of celebrities like Felicia Day and television shows like Chic. She describes another major contributing factor to Geek's popularity to the recent Marvel and other science fiction fantasy movies. She points to the writing of the movies, the Hollywood A-list caliber actors portraying superheroes, and the mainstream marketing for the movies as the means to become popular with previously non-geek-oriented people. As it gained popularity in the theaters, more people have branched out, accepting this new genre of entertainment and creating new interests in other geek space. Though Comic-Cons are where she feels most at home, surrounded by others who share in the same interests and who are so accepting of others. It's a camaraderie created by mutual love and admiration for various fandoms. I don't feel like I have to hide, and I no longer feel ashamed or an outcast, Tara said to me. It's an amazing feeling to finally be open about who I am and what I like. Now I'm going to talk to you about geek identity. Eric Eisenberg proposed a theory of communication and identity that connects a person's communicative choices with their personal narratives with their bodily experience of emotionality and mood, and each of the above with the environmental resources available for the creation and sustenance of particular identities. Conceptualization of this theory includes spiritual, biological, economic, interpersonal, and cultural components. These components comprise what Eisenberg refers to as the surround in his model of the identity process. In his model, these processes are mood, communication, and personal narrative. He posits that our emotions and thoughts, our approach to communicating with others, and how we view our own life story is the core of our identity. Everything in the surround can be influential on these processes, and each of these processes can shape elements in the surround. I would argue that geek identity is deeply attractive to a person who is seeking to validate their own personal narrative or to align their identity with a personal narrative they find alluring. Geek identity is one that can be found early or late in life. There are no specific criteria for becoming a geek. In his book, Freaks, Geeks, and Cool Kids, Murray Milner Jr. outlines processes which can be the result of social formations, combination, and linking. Combination results when people come together by intent or luck, due to common interests, and linking occurs through interaction and the use of common elements of culture, such as listening to the same music or using the same computer program. Linking and combination are the basis of geek identity and social formation. People spending time together take on a distinct identity, and although they may all have vastly differing individual identities, they link together to form a group identity. This group identity can be a cultural influence on their own personal narrative and change the core of a person's individual identity when they start thinking in a more socially aligned context. As with Eisenberg's model of identity, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are can heavily influence how we perceive the world around us and how we behave in it, especially in our relationships with others. Michael Saylor argues in his recent book, As If, that early popularity in the imaginary worlds of Tolkien, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and H.P. Lovecraft have been the precursor for the popularity of massively multiplayer online role-playing games such as World of Warcraft or Second Life. Saylor explores a link between written imaginary worlds created by these authors and the tabletop role-playing games developed to enable fantasy fans to engage within these constructed realities and explore alternative identities through play. One such fantasy role-playing game developed, called Dungeons & Dragons. D&D has been a popular combination of logic and fantasy with its richly detailed worlds to explore, while abiding by a rigid set of rules players must obey during play. According to Saylor, players enjoyed the sense of camaraderie the game offered as much as the sense of wonder it generated. Believing this sense of camaraderie is what enabled this social element in the development of online gaming. Allowing players to socialize with one another behind separate computer screens is a driving force in the popularity of these games. Carl noted that he believes socializing with others encourages geeks to become more involved with gaming today. More and more, he sees geeks of his generation introducing their children and significant others to their hobbies. Carl agrees that technology has influenced the world for geeks, allowing increasing accessibility to niche interests and opening up new avenues to find both products and people to play. With such massive popularity, it is clear that many inhabitants of online virtual worlds were not the solitary antisocial misfits of media lore. Undeniably, mainstream avenues of television are embracing geek culture. We now have a reality show where contestants compete to be crowned King of the Nerds. Nearly half of the contestants in the first season were female, a far cry from the former male-oriented stereotype. Although each competitor has their own personal narrative, they all still ascribe their identity to membership of a larger order. Their conscious lives are too complex to be reduced to unitary narratives. The geek identity enables a cultural bond, providing a platform to explore fantasy and elements of the core personality previously socially unacceptable in the cultural mainstream. With the recent shift of geek to mainstream culture through pop culture, that may soon change as more people are beginning to geek identify and explore this personality in a more safe environment. It is with this acceptance that concepts such as geek chic have followed suit. Popularity of geeks in mainstream media has gained influence over us as a culture. Wired magazine columnist Warren Ellis was quoted in The Guardian as saying, "Geek hasn't beaten the mainstream, it's a new iteration of the mainstream." The spotlight shared by athletes, politicians, and business magnates are becoming rapidly replaced by geeks like Jobs, Gates, and Zuckerberg. People have come to admire geeks and emulate them, adopting their identity. Geek chic arose as the answer to the question, how do I geek? The fashion industry jumped on the bandwagon quickly. Search for geek chic and you will even find how-to articles on adopting geek chic style and what essential items you need. The chosen items, which seem to most represent geek chic, are thick, square-rimmed glasses, geeky t-shirts, and tech accessories such as jewelry made out of circuit boards and iPhones. Geek chic has created a certain image about what folks that are into science and technology should look like, a packaged representation, the accuracy of which is debated. Some decry geek chic as unrepresentative of their culture, while others profess it doesn't bother them if people want to try it, they might like it and stay in the community. Tara is one of those geeks who does not mind it, defining it as the idea that geek can be fashionable and mainstream. She gets excited the more people might join in. She does not perceive geekdom as a hierarchy with different levels of geek. John Scalzi, author of 3 New York Times bestselling science fiction novels, agrees with her. He writes in his blog, "There is no speaker for geeks. They don't get a vote on your geekdom." Jason Lieber perceives geek chic as a fallacy. He described the geek community as varied. The whole idea behind geekdom is come as you are. You can be the young professional, the teenage loner, or the 30-year-old who has been between jobs most of their life. Jason dislikes the parts of the community speaking down about others, believing the concept of geek chic perpetuates the problem. If you ask me who the typical geek is, I wouldn't be able to answer it. They come in all shapes, sizes, creeds, sexual identities, and that's okay. That's actually perfect. Whether geeks view the concept of geek chic in a positive light, or as one infiltrating a community to seek attention, this appearance-driven concept encourages merchandising opportunities for profit. Geek chic requires certain mass-produced items to be recognized as a geek. In July 2012, Joe Peacock wrote a geek-themed blog for CNN, posting, "Corporations are figuring out that geeks have money and they want it, but they can't abide putting a typically geeky face on camera, so they hire models to act quirky and sell this marketable geekdom." The geek chic items are all generating huge profits for companies, opening up other types of items to be mass-produced and marketed. Jason embraces the opportunity to spend his money on geek items he would not otherwise be able to create, crediting the geek merchandising craze to George Lucas. He believes that when Lucas retained the merchandising rights to Star Wars, earning himself billions of dollars in revenue, he let the cat out of the bag. The more popular a show, the more merchandising it generates. Companies now recognize commercial success and the repetitive reliance on profitable formulas, finding a new avenue from which to generate profits. Geek consumers, in turn, found a new avenue to purchase material goods which embody their personal narrative. The reinforcement of profits back to corporations encourages more merchandising, and thus the cycle repeats itself. Each new fandom in the mainstream is almost immediately accompanied by specific products from the show which can be purchased by fans. Before officially licensed products became widely available, fans got creative with crafts to forge their own versions of coveted items to use for cosplay, costume play, or for display purposes. Cosplay is an outlet for geek-minded individuals to dress up, emulate, and sometimes, in their mind, temporarily become a specific character. The personal narrative and dialogue of an individual geek becomes set aside, either partially or in totality, as the persona they have adopted takes over. However, with the emulation of the new character, they are still in essence the same person. The costume play becomes a visual and audible extension of who they imagine themselves to be on the inside, put on display for the outside world. This expression of self through disguise is popular amongst members of the geek community, flooding gatherings of geeks at comic and anime conventions. The frequency of cosplay populating the geek culture landscape lends itself as a population not only willing to purchase merchandise in mass quantities, but one on the constant hunt for accumulation of material goods. Carl sees the increase of geek consumerism as both positive and negative. For consumers, it is a positive, stating, "The fact that you can own Harry Potter's wand or any replica from your fandom, I think it helps people be more individual or serve as a way to indulge yourself in your hobby or fantasy. Using these objects serves as a physical extension of your perceived identity, reinforcing it through cosplay." On the negative side, Carl believes mass merchandising of fandoms inundates consumers. The marketing for each new distribution of a superhero movie releases the floodgates on new merchandise, only to disappear from the market, becoming scarce once the hype dies down, encouraging a fire sale mentality in the consumer. It's unnecessary consumption to make money, Carl noted. Though the owner of a store himself, he takes care to fill the needs of each customer according to what they are seeking in a product, professing to me that he hates stores blindly pushing products to consumers after hyping it up. First-time customers will often become disenfranchised with gaming once it does not live up to the promised reality. Carl's ideology is closer aligned with the shared geek mindset than that of big business, wanting people who are curious about geeky interests to learn more about it. Though we all walk separate paths in life, popular culture ties us all together and gives us a commonality to communicate ourselves to one another. What does this mean for us all as a whole? Are we all really geeks now, as Michael Saylor asserts? After investigating this claim, I am inclined to agree with him, but would add that if we are not all geeks now, we will be soon. The sheer abundance of geek in the media, in merchandise, and cultural references on television and online is much greater today than in the past. To study geek is to see who we are and where we are headed, destined to create a new reality for ourselves with a technological future ahead of us. This reality will soon become part of everyone's personal narrative and core identity. Thank you.